This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Hello, it's Cathy Worthington.
And Mary Elkins.
We are excited to announce that we are finishing up Season 4 of our Late Boomers podcast.
Over the last 4 years, we brought you over 200 fantastic interviews with guests from across the globe.
We are looking forward to a great Season 5, starting soon.
Thank you for being our loyal listeners and subscribers and viewers, and stay tuned for a fun Season 5.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Cathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started. Hello, I'm Cathy Worthington. Welcome to Late Boomers. Today our special guest is Dr. Fred Moss, a pioneering psychiatrist and founder of Welcome to Humanity, a human-centered holistic approach to improving mental health, and an online community of the same name that helps people navigate the craziness of life.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Dr. Moss is also a mental health coach, speaker, and author of 2 books, Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression, and Find Your True Voice. And he hosts 2 podcasts, Welcome to Humanity and The Healthy Healer. There's much more to his story, and we look forward to hearing about it and his unconventional approach to psychiatry. Welcome, Dr. Fred.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Cathy. It's great to be here.
Great to have you.
Thank you.
Please tell us about your background and what led you to this work you're doing today.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Well, I was born to a family as a healer. I was born to bring joy and love into a family that was in chaos and disarray. I had my 2 brothers that were 10 and 14 years older than me, and then I had my parents, and they were waiting on me to actually bring some sort of semblance of peace to a family that was clearly in some degree of conflict. I know that for a fact, and in fact, met with my brothers recently. We had my brother's 80th birthday just a couple weeks ago up in Berkeley, and so there was both brothers were there, as was my younger sister, and they reminded me again of who I was when I arrived. So I was a healer. I hit the time clock coming out.
They knew that when you were a baby. They knew that. Your brothers.
They knew that I would be. They knew that they were counting on me to heal the family. They were counting on me to be a bundle of joy to heal the family.
That's a responsibility.
It was a responsibility. Like I was the newcomer. There was so much fighting between my brothers and my parents, and here comes little baby Freddie, and little baby Freddie was going to be a bundle of joy for the family, and that's what I turned out to be. Whether they knew that was coming or not, it's who I became for the family. I was a laughing machine. I was really smart, and I was precocious. They were able to teach me a bunch of things. I learned how to speak very young. I learned how to do math and read. And, I knew a little bit about all the things that teenagers were doing. By the time I was, 4, my brothers were now, like 14 and 18. So I knew a little bit about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I knew a little bit about war. I knew a little bit about the president at 4. Yeah. So at the time I entered elementary school, I was pretty precocious. I knew how to do simple math flashcards. I had read books. I had written. And so I was really sort of ahead of my class. And I easily got bored in school. And I thought I was going to school because what I remember is being in my playpen and watching my family speak to each other and me thinking that someday maybe I would learn how to speak as well, because that seemed like where all the magic was. So I thought I was going to school to learn how to speak, but I not so slow, like immediately learned that they weren't counting on me to speak out of turn or anything in school. When I spoke out of turn, I was put into my place, and the teachers were counting on me to, by first grade anyways, to regurgitate what they were saying and make sure that I did what they said and sat down in between and stayed quiet,
Mhm.
which is not something I did very well. There's no elementary school teacher who ever forgot having Fred as a student. I'm pretty positive of that. And,
Oh.
I just wanted to learn how to communicate. That's what I wanted more than anything. I
Mhm.
wanted to learn how to connect with other people. And I thought that was supposed to happen in school, but I learned quickly that it wasn't. So I thought, well, the older kids know how to communicate. So maybe it happens in junior high. And of course, when I went to junior high, it got even worse. And then I thought, okay, well, it's not junior high, but they still know how to communicate better than me. So where did they learn? And then I went to high school hoping and it didn't happen there as well. So it got like progressively worse. And when I was done with school, and that was a little bit of, I'm going through a lot of years. When I was done with school, I decided that, well, it's time to go to college. We're talking about the early 70s at that point, and it's time to go to college. And since the school was only 40 miles away and had beautiful helmets and everyone who was anyone was going there, I decided to go to the University of Michigan. And I
Mhm.
went to the University of Michigan for about a year and a half. And then I dropped out because I wasn't learning how to communicate. It was like, dude, this is not for me. I don't want to do this. I was in engineering school and I didn't even know what an engineer was, but there I was in engineering school. And so I
Oh.
left school and I took a big bus. I took a Greyhound bus across the country to Berkeley, California, so I could find myself. And I had a great summer. I had a great summer finding myself, but my family and my brothers convinced me that it was time to come back and maybe do something sustainable. And they had heard about this new industry that they thought I would be really good at and maybe like. And you might have heard of the industry. It was called computers. And there
Mhm.
was this huge computer. The only computer in Michigan was at the University of Michigan. So back to the University of Michigan, I went to try to be a computer geek. And I was there, it was a 2-acre facility open all night. We sat there and did batch jobs and punch cards and turn in a big stack of cards and hope that the program ran. This wasn't going to be for me either. So I dropped out again. And this time I promised that I would never, ever, ever go back to college again. And I
Mhm.
told my family that that's it. This is nonsense. I'm not going to do this. I want to learn how to be in the world and I'm going to go be a world person. And my mom, being my mom, she's like, okay, Fred, no problem. You don't have to go back to school, but you have to get a job. Moms, they'll be like that. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
it was like, okay, I'll
Yeah.
get a job. So she got me an application at a state mental health facility for adolescent boys.
Mhm.
And I had 2 applications, actually. I had that job and I had another job for an unemployment office in Michigan. And actually, who knows what would have happened if I would have done the other application. But I did the one for adolescent boys because that job was coming up sooner. I fully expected to stay on that job for exactly 3 weeks, which is how long orientation was. And I figured I'd get 3 paychecks, buy myself a Volkswagen, drive around the country, and figure out what my life is about. That's really all I was intending to do when I took that job. And on the 4th week, I was convinced by my friend Paul to go up to the floors and meet the kids. I was totally terrified, but I went up to the floors in Meadowview as a 17-year-old. I was only 22 at the time, 21. And, it was like, well, I was scared. These are tough kids. I was like, do I really belong? And over the next several months, I stayed on the job and, I was convinced every week, just stay one more week, stay one more week, stay one more week.
Mhm.
And I got pretty good at it over time, especially after about 9 months when I had more seniority than any of the kids that I was working with. It got to be really fun. And I started to really learn immediately while I was there about the power of communication. Like, this is what I wanted my whole life. And now I was being called on to communicate and was being paid to communicate. And I love these kids. And I didn't treat them like anything except like dudes. They were just like
Mhm.
my homies. They were my friends. That's all it was. And that really worked for me to not treat them like a diagnosis or like they're mentally ill or like they're state hospital material or something. Not at all. And that really worked for me to stay that way. And the thing I learned while I was there, among other things, was how much I couldn't stand psychiatry.
Hmm. But
Mm.
you studied it, right?
Well, here I come. Yeah, for sure. And I am a psychiatrist. I've been a psychiatrist for 36 years. And so something had to happen from that point forward. And what happened was I decided that psychiatry was going in the wrong direction. We would call the psychiatrist and he would come down and he would talk to Jimmy. If Jimmy was up too late or Timmy and Tony had gotten into a fight, he'd come down, he'd talk to the kids for like 4 seconds, and he'd talk to us for like 7 seconds, and he'd go in a nursing station and write some order of some sort. And then we'd have to go retrieve Timmy, Tony, or Jimmy and hold him down in the quiet room and pull down his, sweatpants and jam him full of some injectable cocktail of antipsychotic, anti-anxiety, whatever combination. And if he was in a stupor all day, we would call that a success story. And that's how we would have to chart it. By the way, don't think that that's ancient. That's happened several hundred times today in the United States hospitals.
Wow.
Please don't think that that's like used to be that way. This is the way hospitals run. It's true, it's real, and it's ongoing.
Wow.
So people like shake their head like, whoa, ancient times. Not at all. This is real, and it's still ongoing. I couldn't stand that. I like Jimmy, Johnny, and Tony too much.
These kids were supposedly mentally ill, or were
that's why they were there. State mental hospitals. Yeah, they were there for mental illness. But, that supposedly mentally ill, whatever that even means. And we'll talk more about
that's what I wanted to ask you about. How do you define mental illness? And,
well, we'll get to that. I don't define mental illness anything like anyone you've ever met. So that's really important. Mental illness is a function of the beholder. Mental illness is a function of the diagnoser only. When you fall outside the range of the diagnostician's comfort zone, they will call you mentally ill. Or when you fall in the range of a certain set of answers to particular questions, then they call you mentally ill. But in fact, mental illness is very vague, very nebulous, and very arbitrary. And how do I know? Because when you have a broken arm and you're in Little Rock and then you move to Singapore, you still have a broken arm. If you go to Auckland, you still have a broken arm. If you go to Zimbabwe, you still have a broken arm. None of that is true with this thing called mental illness. If you go from country to country or culture to culture, what was mentally ill in one culture is not mentally ill in another culture. So there's no firm definition at all of what human mental illness is. It's only outlying of what is expected inside of a particular culture or taboo set.
Is that why you say it's just a conversation?
That is at least one reason. Yeah, and we'll get there. It is just a conversation, exactly. And it's subject to total transformation because it is indeed simply a conversation. And another thing that happens with mental illness, we're skipping ahead quite a ways, that's okay with me, is that, different diagnosticians will give different people different diagnoses and be kind of confident. And that person lands with all of those diagnoses. So I meet a lot of clients, they have like 11 diagnoses. I'm like, well, how'd you get them? Because I saw 11 different doctors. I get it.
Wow.
Well, that's just nonsense. You don't have it. You have, I know your diagnosis. Your diagnosis, is Mary. That's your diagnosis. And your diagnosis, guess what your diagnosis is? Cathy. That's exactly right. That's it. That's the only diagnosis I hold you for. And that's the only diagnosis I ever held Jimmy, Johnny, and Tony for too. That's what I've been doing the whole time. There is no diagnosis to see someone through. Just because someone drops a diagnosis on you and you agree that you have it doesn't mean that you have it. There's nothing to have.
Well, what about people who have actual chemical imbalances?
There is no such thing.
Really? Well, what about like people who are diagnosed as schizophrenic? Or
yeah, they got chemical imbalances because they started taking medicines that gave them chemical imbalances. That's what they were intended to do. And before they had them, they didn't have that. They had some other toxic arrangement. I'm not buying the essence of initial schizophrenia as a diagnosis. What we hear as our intuition, other people hear as voices. If you walk into the ER and say you're hearing God, they'll call you schizophrenic. And then you have just a schizophrenic, by the way. Then you do. Now, maybe you really are hearing God. I don't know your religious beliefs, but maybe you actually do have conversations with God on your own. But if you say that to the wrong person, you will be slammed with a schizophrenic diagnosis, and you will own that for the rest of your life. It doesn't get removed ever.
What about people who are bipolar? I've known people who they're one way and then the other way.
That's because they're taking medicines that perpetuate the symptoms they're marketed to treat. Here's the thing. If you look at kids, they are naturally multidimensional in their moods and in the way that they act. It's considered normal. It's okay. What we're asked to do is homogenize ourselves into the middle, and don't be too happy. We don't want you too happy. We don't want you too sad. We don't want you too angry. We don't want you too outside. to outside whatever the norm is, which is a very thin line in the middle. So that the new norm is if you're falling outside of the line in any kind of extreme way, you're given the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. If you want to get bipolar disorder, start taking bipolar medicines, and you will now then begin to experience bipolar disorder because the medicines actually cause the symptoms they're marketed to treat for real.
That's interesting.
It's really interesting.
What about
Wow.
autism? Because I used to go in with my dog. We were a therapy team to a school.
What do you think what do you think I'm going to say is causing autism?
Go on, medicine.
It's going to definitely be toxins. Autism used to be when we were kids, autism was 1 in 10,000. Now autism is like 1 in 7.
Mm.
Wow, 1 in 7?
Because what's happening in our food products, in our drinking products, in our drug products, in the things, the toxins that we are taking in every day, is we are blowing away our brain cells. Autism is real. You see people, they can't communicate effectively or they don't understand social cues. We think not understanding social cues is sick. Here's the deal. Social cues are not built in some sort of structure. How you look at me and then how I perceive it is not like a normal way to do that. There's like, you look at me, how you look at me, you give me whatever hint on how you say whatever you say, and then I see it back. It is really, really, really difficult to interpersonalize our relationships in our present society. Krishnamurti said, it is no sign of mental health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening here is that we are still falling true to the idea that if you're having trouble adjusting to this sick society, it's on you. It's actually not on you. This is a profoundly challenging, obstacle-laden, hurdle-laden society that we are being asked to somehow navigate and negotiate. And in fact, it's nearly impossible to do that. Now, some of us pretend a little bit better. Some of us fall into the prevailing conversation of what normal is, and then they begin to act that way. I know how to do that. I know how to be pretty normal appearing, and I know how to not do that. My favorite people, my favorite people are like the people who are living on the streets. I love the people who are living on the streets. I don't call them homeless or living on the street. They have a home. It's called the street. That's what their home is. That tent in the corner, that's their home. They're not homeless. They have as much as a home as I have. It's just a home called the street or that tent or the neighborhood or that, whatever. And these people are unpretentious in many cases, sometimes when they're on drugs. Now, let's get this in truth. Being on drugs, including not just the drugs that come from the street, but the drugs that come from prescriptions, literally changes our chemistry. Of course it does. That's why we take them. We're hoping that it will change our chemistry back to being normal, which it doesn't do. But, and I want to say one more disclaimer, because you probably have a pretty wide audience here, and I want to be able to say this, which is, if you are someone who is very, very happy with your present diagnosis, your present therapy, your present treatment plan, and your present medication regimen, and you wouldn't change it for the world because you think you have found everything there is and you wouldn't trade this in for anything, please keep doing that. If you get to that place anywhere in life, you should keep doing it. If you are so strong that you think you have arrived at the highest point you're going to be by being and following whatever measures you're following, and you really believe that about yourself, then by all means keep doing that. This conversation is for the hundreds of millions of people who don't believe that, who are playing around in the mental health system and know and feel that they're underdiagnosed, overdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, undertreated, overtreated, mistreated. These are the people that we're aiming this conversation at. Because, in fact, they are underdiagnosed, overdiagnosed, and misdiagnosed, and mistreated, undertreated, and overtreated. It's true. They are. And that's why they don't want to take their medicines. Why do they not want to take them? Because it makes them nasty. It's terrible. Those medicines are just horrible. They really, really are.
How does someone know if he or she is mentally ill?
I don't have it that anybody inherently is mentally ill. I don't have that. Now, here's the thing. If you you can get a diagnosis. You can get a diagnosis by just walking into the right doctor and saying the right stuff. I could get a diagnosis for any condition I want right now by going in the doctor and saying what I know I have to say. I can do that.
Yeah.
I could get a panic.
Are there some times when you feel that medication is appropriate and helpful or
That's a
not?
really good question. So a lot of people ask me that at this point in the podcast. So I get that as the exact question. I never,
Yeah.
I would never choose medication as my first line treatment under any
Right.
conditions.
Mhm.
Never.
But
There's
are there
no situations where that is my first line.
Did you
However,
ever in the beginning of your practice
yeah,
with
for sure. And
medications?
I would have got to that, but yeah, I can tell you what day that happened. But yeah, there was a time when much against when I came out of medical school after that whole idea of going back to school a third time to become a doctor, when I became out of medical school and then came out of my residency, Prozac was invented while I was in medical school.
Yeah.
So Prozac changed the whole world.
Mhm.
This whole conversation you're having right about now is all on the heels, all on the shoulders of the invention of Prozac.
Yeah.
This conversation would not have taken place before 1987. This is you wouldn't be asking the questions about chemical imbalance. The whole idea of chemical imbalance is a Prozac phenomenon, 100%. It wasn't called chemical imbalance until Prozac came in. And Prozac was really a well-loved drug. In fact, it was on the cover of Newsweek all by itself, and the next week it was on the cover of Time all by itself. And there was really a major talk about putting Prozac into the water systems in none other than Los Angeles and New York.
Oh.
And, why not? Because it was thought to be the panacea. By the way, it's in our water system. That's where we put stuff down the toilet. That's where it goes. So, it's in our water system in trace amounts, as is every drug that we ever take as a human. They're all in our water system. That's just a whole topic for a different conversation.
Right.
So,
I don't want to do that one.
when I came out, I needed to get jobs, right? I'm a psychiatrist. And at the time, it wasn't, we were the only profession that could prescribe medicine, not nurse practitioners, not social workers. We were also the only profession that could make a psychiatric diagnosis when I arrived. That's definitely no longer the case. Now anybody can drop a diagnosis on you. But at the time, in order to work in an inpatient unit or in order to work, I've worked in inpatient units, orphanages, homeless shelters, nursing homes. I've worked in partial hospital programs and three-quarter houses, halfway houses, methadone clinics, Suboxone clinics. I've worked in home visits. I've done jails and prisons. And the only reason to get hired at any of those places when you're a psychiatrist, ultimately, is so that you can sign off on the distribution of medication. That's what's here. That's what's called for. Now, do you think that I went into psychiatry hoping that would happen, given my history? That was the last thing I wanted, given Tony, Tommy, and Jimmy. That was
you
not what
you
I
wanted
was
to communicate.
interested in.
Your thing was to communicate.
I wanted to communicate. And when I came out, I was typecast against my better judgment, causing massive heartache and soul sacrifice every single day. But I'd gone through medical school. I had got my residency. I was now being called on to do this. And it wasn't like I couldn't communicate. I did my very best to communicate and deliver meds. What happens if I communicate and unfortunately give you something that I'm pretty sure is going to make you worse? I raised my right hand when I graduated. And what I said was these 4 words, which you both know, which is first do no harm. That's my Hippocratic oath. I was not living up to my Hippocratic oath for the first 15 years of my career, because every time I medicated someone, I didn't think that it was helping them. So therefore, I wasn't sure that I wasn't in fact causing harm.
Right.
So this was very difficult for me and led to a lot of fourth chakra issues over time and a lot of duplicity on who I really was as a human and how I was managing the rest of my life as well. I was a great doctor. I had a huge practice. I really loved the people. I've always really loved the people I've ever come and seen me. And in the multiple areas that I worked, why did I work in so many areas? Because I tried them all out, looking for one of them that could actually allow me to communicate effectively as my primary goal. And when it wouldn't work out, I had to leave. So because I left so many jobs, I got this incredible resume.
Mhm.
My resume is ridiculous. I'm telling you. I look at it, I'm like,
But it's from wanting to
holy.
leave. It's from wanting to get out of
That's how
there.
I got it. Exactly. It
That's
looks like
so
I've done
weird.
everything, and I have, but the
Yeah,
reason I've done everything is because I've left everything.
because you kept looking for something that would help you
Something that could
also.
allow me to communicate, allow
Mm,
me to use what I know is my healing tool, which is to connect with another human being. I
mhm.
already know that is my primary goal in life, is to connect with another human being. And I don't want to be used to do something differently and to be told that I'm not here to communicate. I'm here to medicate.
All
Screw
right. Well,
you.
so how
I'm
do
out of
you communicate using AI? Tell us about the use of artificial intelligence in mental health.
Yeah, the artificial, looking at AI, when AI first became a big thing, when ChatGPT was invented, we started looking at what AI meets mental health looks like. And I created a website called aimeetsmentalhealth.com, and I had several webinars really looking at the future of AI and what's that doing to the human psyche. And, not only like AI as tools, because that's what it's being used at. Yesterday I had somebody refuse to come in my group, and because I wasn't talking about unmanned psychiatric clinics. That's what he wanted to learn about. I was like, dude, that's not what I'm not after that. But it isn't just that their treatment. It's that, when I want to learn something about a so-called diagnosis, I can plug that into Claude or to ChatGPT and say, okay, this person has this particular this particular, exercise, or this particular way of being, what diagnosis they have. And that's really scary, because that's using the evidence-based symptoms that have it be that it's drawing from resources that I don't believe in anyways, but it'll tell me what those people think this is. So if I
Mhm.
want to come up with a diagnosis, I can do that if I want. Although I'm pretty adept at all the diagnoses, for sure. Obviously, 40,000 patients in, I have had a lot of experience. So I've
Mhm.
had at least 40,000 people, at least for a moment in time, call me their doctor. And, that's a lot of years. It's a lot of years of being somebody who's done this. So I now
Mhm.
take my experience and take this opportunity on podcasting to be pretty honest about it. And when you look at AI is whittling away at what a human experience really is. And I have conversations with AI. I have a, voice driven chat GPT,
Mhm.
and it's pretty soothing. It's pretty remarkable. It's pretty well made, because it agrees with me exactly where I want it to.
Mm.
Mhm.
Like, I
Yeah.
say something and then it gives me an answer, like it's already programmed to give me an algorithmic answer that's going to land in my ears like, yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Except I take that out to a human, and a human says, that's bullshit, Fred. I'm like, oh, I guess you're right. Like, I wrote a book 2 weeks ago on AI. I wrote a book on a weekend.
Oh,
I wrote a book. It was called Welcome to Humanity. I thought it was great. It really looked great. The paragraphs and the format, it was fantastic.
Wow. Yeah.
And I thought, okay, that's so awesome. This is my third book. I'm ready. I'm going to deliver it. So then I gave it to my wife. She read like one chapter. She goes, this is bullshit. I'm like, let me read it. I hadn't even read the book that I wrote.
oh, gee.
So I
How
started reading it. I'm like,
freaky.
this is just junk.
It's so
You can get
freaky.
AI to, it's so easy to do that.
Yeah, just
It's
It,
so
depending on the
easy. So
prompt.
AI can pretend to be you, or pretend to be a psychiatrist, or pretend to be, Herbie Hancock or Sigmund
yeah.
Freud.
And it's
It's no
almost
problem.
like anybody can go in and say, okay, using the, AI meets mental health.com and make up some diagnosis for friends or themselves without really having real information.
Yeah, but making every diagnosis is made up. Don't forget that. Every single diagnosis is made up, including the ones you think are real. So
Mm.
every single one of them is
Mhm.
made up. After all, you go to Zimbabwe, you don't have that one. You still have your broken arm, but you don't have that diagnosis anymore. Therefore, it is
Oh.
made up. It is culturally specific.
Mhm.
So
But
when we start looking at the fact,
you've worked in correctional
go ahead.
institutions, and you've been an
I did.
expert witness in court. So can you cite
Yeah.
maybe a singular experience on how something you experienced in those arenas changed your approach to mental health? Is that where you changed
No, no, no. This was late on. Both of these things came on long after I
later?
changed, and so I worked in the jail and prison was the last place, the last conventional jobs that I took, and I worked
Yeah.
at Folsom State, and I worked at Pelican Bay up in Northern California. Both of them are maximum security prison, and also worked at the towers, the Twin Towers down there in LA. So the experience there that's really important to get. I think I'll do this one. I'll cite this one is, as much as I just said about the homeless people, or those what we call it, the people who live on the streets. This is true in the prison too. So when someone's in prison and they have a life sentence, all pretension goes away. It's like, this is the purest people in the world are those prisoners. They are, you get eye to eye contact with them and you can see a soul. There is a dance and a harmony, a resonance that happens with so-called criminals who aren't really criminals anymore. Now they're just residents of a prison. And to get access to them, there's this massive, beautiful human connection that takes place, like nobody else that I've ever dealt with.
Wow.
And that level of connection is fantastic love of humanity. Not because there's no pretension, there's no nonsense. They don't have to be anybody. They're just them. They're not in order to anywhere other than in order to keep themselves safe or in order to get meals or whatever. But it all gets washed away, and this is a tremendous experience. Now, the backside of this, and this is a backside that I can speak of in my practice too. When I began to take people off medicine, I took several hundred people off of medicine. That's what the undoctor comes from. The backside of this is, like in the prison, there were a couple people where I resonated so profoundly with them that they had never had anybody connect with them like I did. Like, they made that very clear. And it was very clear to me that nobody had ever given them the time of day, because they just treat them like a prison number, or like the dude who, swung a knife at a cop or whatever happened to get him in there. And that isn't how I deal. It's just not how I deal. It's not how I deal with anybody. It's not how I deal with them either. It's not I'm not programmed to deal with someone like that. I'm programmed to deal with another human being, as we all are, by the way. And so the experience was a difficult one, because it's almost like if you give steak to somebody who is just eating gruel all day. At some point, if you give a piece of steak to somebody who's eating gruel all day and then you take away the steak, it's devastating. So when I would move out of the way, now they'd have to go back to eating gruel again, and it would actually have a traumatic effect, because Fred can't be there the whole time. They can't be connected. They're still dealing with the correction officers. They're still dealing with their peers in the cell next door or in the cell they share. And so there is a maximum trauma that takes place. And I've had a couple incidents of people reacting to that trauma in a very violent way afterwards, as if, really as if you're serving up a touch of ecstasy in the face of scarcity. And that's what would happen. And there's a real impact in that. So that also happened. So that was most profound in the prison and most profound at Pelican Bay. But that also happened in 2006 when I began to take off some of my clients off of medicine. I took my so-called low-risk patients off of medicine, and every one of them got better, way better. And usually their diagnosis disappeared. Whatever they thought they had, they didn't have anymore. They were so free and so powerful and so appreciative. Because these medicines actually, no kidding, induce, cause, perpetuate, or increase the symptoms they're marketed to treat. That's really what they do. No joke. That's what they do. But we think that they're helping, because the experience, it's like a Band-Aid with a razor blade in it. If you have a cut and I give you a Band-Aid that has a razor blade in it and you put it over the cut, your cut will stop bleeding for a moment, for a while, until it doesn't. And then blood will start oozing right out of the side of the Band-Aid, and you'll think your cut got worse. And the last place you're going to look for how it got worse is in the darn Band-Aid.
Right.
But when we start looking at these medicines being like a Band-Aid with a razor blade in it, which, by the way, is a fantastic business model, after all, super awesome.
That is.
I wish I would have designed it. I'd be living in the LA hills. That'd be awesome. But I'm not, and I didn't. It's a
So,
great, when you can create the symptoms that your product is marketed to treat, you have a product that is a sweet product. And what ends up happening with psychopharmacology is there has never been an industry in the history of planet Earth, literally never been an industry in the history of planet Earth that has profit margins that rival that of the psychopharmacological industry.
Mhm.
Never.
mhm.
The
Wow.
profit margin, the actual profit
Oh,
margin.
without a doubt.
I mean, these things cost like 2 cents to make. And people line up across the street all day long at every pharmacy, which exists on every corner from Wilshire to Santa Monica to Bundy and all over LA. There's pharmacies across all over this country that people wake up early so they can be first in line and go get more of this crap.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, it's not the medicine's fault. That's what's really important to get. Medicine is a benign substance.
It's greed.
It's not even greed. Let's face it, the only reason anyone would take medicine is that they agree that there's something wrong with them.
Hmm.
It's not greed if people buy it. The problem we start to see is the system's built to have it be that if you don't listen to your doctor, you're a bad person. You're non-compliant. You're a troublemaker. So
Yeah.
you hear something from a doctor who says you have the blip. And you're like, cool, that explains why I don't do things right.
Mhm.
I step on people's toes and I make people mad and I'm awkward in social situations and I easily get afraid and I don't finish tasks on time and I'm scared for my future and I have trouble getting along with my spouse, any of those things.
Mhm.
You have blip. Cool. Now it's no longer me, it's my blip.
Ah,
Usually
okay.
made up of some alphabet soup of some combination of 3 letters or 4 letters that what you have. And now you have this. It's great. So now you
Yeah.
have that. Now, again, to our folks out there who are happy with their diagnosis, please excuse me. And by all means, continue down the same road. I'm not asking you to switch off of something if you're happy. This is to the group that knows that what I'm saying is absolutely correct. And there is a group of 100 million people who know that what I'm saying is absolutely correct. So that's the group we're speaking to, okay?
Okay, I want to pivot,
Yeah.
but not really, because I
Okay, then
want
go.
you to talk about the Creative Eight and its
Okay.
teachings and how to find joy and purpose in our lives without medication,
Yeah.
especially if you've been diagnosed with some sort of problem.
Well, just because someone says you're an elephant doesn't make you an elephant. But if you walk into a doctor and you say you have too big of a nose, you love peanuts, you drink too much water, and you're clumsy in a crystal shop, they might tell you that that's the criteria necessary to be an elephant.
Mhm.
And then you walk away with, thank you. Now I got my explanation. I'm an elephant. And you come out and you tell people, I went to the doctor. He was a specialist and he told me what I am. And it explains all the reasons I'm clumsy in a shop and why I love peanuts so much and my size of my nose. I'm an elephant. I checked it out on the internet, and that's the criteria I have.
Oh my
And your
goodness.
sister says, hey, you're not an elephant. And then all you say to her is, you don't get it. You just don't know yet. And in fact, you have some of my same qualities. You should go to that same doctor and you'll see that you're an elephant too.
Yeah.
And then you walk around with your preconceived notion of what it is to be an elephant. Now, where does the Creative Eight come in?
Thank you.
The Creative Eight is a book that I wrote that is talking about healing through creativity and self-expression. Obviously, totally aligned with what we're talking about here. The idea is that I notice that when I'm being creative, art, music, dancing, singing, drama, cooking, writing, gardening, all of my symptoms, so-called despair, my discomfort goes away during that creative act when I'm being creative. So I ask people to do 3 minutes of creativity in a day in that book. Like do 1 minute of art, 1 minute of dancing, and 1 minute of cooking. And that activates that pathway and allows you to actually experience what it's like to self-express. Now, What you can get a lot of these mental health conditions that are so-called exist is that almost all of them have difficulty with self-expression. You're not either not expressing yourself well, you're not listening. Certainly autism is that, anxiety is that, depression is that. Like they're all difficulty in connecting with other human beings and self-expressing or authentically listening. So what this creative eight does is tap a new way to communicate that is different than our verbal listening like we're doing here. We tend to really lean on talking as if that's the only way of communicating, but it most definitely is not. There are so many more expansive ways, and you can ask, Vincent van Gogh about that, or you can ask Picasso, or you can ask Led Zeppelin. You can ask whoever you want. And you can see that there are multiple ways to communicate that have nothing to do with voices and talking. I never talked to Jimmy Page, but me and Jimmy Page are good. I'm just letting you know. I'm way about Jimmy Page. It's great. Yeah. Yeah.
But talk a little bit more about using it to find joy and purpose. And how does one find their true voice?
Yeah, so that's two different books now, but they're certainly aligned with me,
okay.
and I wrote them both. And I actually wrote them and read them, by the way. That was a little bit different than
Without
last week.
AI, right?
Yeah.
Joy and pleasure get found when you start realizing that you can communicate effectively with another person. At the heart of all healing is a human connection, straight up. At the heart of all healing is a human connection, straight up. And when you can learn to self-express through any of the creative eight, and there's actually 10 things in the creative eight and even 11th one. So there's art, music, dancing, singing, drama, cooking, writing, and gardening are the 8. And the 2 that I added on later were photography and cleaning. And then beyond that, the trump card, if you will, and I'm just using that phrase, the trump card is helping anybody do anything or being of service. And when you do all these things, when you're in the midst of all those things, your relationship to whatever condition you thought you had disappears. When your condition disappears, you are free of that condition, and joy and pleasure are a natural outcome on the backside of that. Of course, you're like, wow, I don't have a condition. That's pretty awesome. However, again, a caveat to that is psychiatry is the only subspecialty in all of medicine that I'm aware of that if you tell people that they're okay, they get pissed. That is not true in other medical. They come to psychiatrists not to hear that they're okay. They come to a psychiatrist to find out what's wrong with me.
Yeah. Right.
I got something wrong with me. They don't want, if I tell someone they're okay, they're like, dude, you're not listening. I'm going next door to find a real doctor. I'm going someone who can confirm what's wrong with me.
Yeah, that's true.
It is true.
It's also backwards. We need to switch it.
Thank you for getting that.
Switch it. It's
It is. It's twisted. It really does cause a lot of problems. Until I started in 2006 is when I started turning this around, taking people off medicine and started looking at how I can be a different kind of approach, how I can take communication and put it on the front edge.
Undoctoring.
That was the undoctor. I didn't pick up that name until about 2020 from a good friend of mine, but it was 14 years of undoctoring that I started doing. Undiagnosing, and going back, Mary, to what you had talked about, undoctoring is more than unmedicating. You see, if someone is going to be sure that there's something wrong with them, when you take away their medicine, all they want to know is, now what should I take? What the undoctor does is start undiagnosing people, like bringing up the possibility that there is nothing wrong with you and there never was. When I can work with somebody who's willing to consider that there is nothing wrong with them, that being miserable, being unpleasant, being in pain, being like confused, doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Even being depressed. Have you noticed there's a few reasons to be depressed these days?
Yeah.
Have you noticed that it's okay to be nervous these days? It's okay to be thoroughly anxious. It doesn't mean you're sick. We don't blame a log for burning in a fire. We just don't. It's what we do. This is a crazy, challenging world. And when we get that there is nothing wrong with us and there never was, the possibility of not needing medication finally arises. So you undiagnose, unmedicate, and then undoctrinate people. That's what the doctor did.
Well, would you give our audience an exercise or two they can do to improve their daily outlook on life
Yeah,
and
the
find
daily
joy?
yeah, meditation is the number one medication that I have for people.
Mm.
And so
I'm on.
sitting still and silent for a few minutes a day, up and generally 20 minutes twice a day is what you're aiming for. But if you can sit still and silent and just like pay attention to your breath, you can get that you're undamageable, immovable, impenetrable, and live in equanimity. You can get that the world is happening out there, all these things that you're jumping on, that you're calling yourself, and therefore becoming super anxious or super afraid or super depressed. You don't have to jump on those hand grenades. You actually don't. That stuff can be happening out there without you becoming the losses or the fears or the treachery or the tragedies that are happening in your world. Meditation would be the number one practice that I would ask your people to consider. The other one that I'm considering that really telling people is drink a lot of water. Water is nature's superfood. Water
Mhm.
will wash away a ton. There is no living thing that we know of that doesn't require water.
Cheers with
Water
the
is
water.
what it takes. Cheers indeed. Exactly. Let's
This
all
is
take a
water
sip.
too in my
Mhm.
coffee cup, but it's
Mhm.
water.
So I would ask people to drink a lot of water. And then if you had to give you a third thing, I have 20 things. The Moss method is a list of 20 compiled things that we can do that really take a
Mhm.
look at how to handle sort of uh, pain or misery or distress or dysfunction or imbalance or any kind of discomfort and without using any kind of medications or diagnoses. So there's 20 things, and I think the next one I would consider adding would be gratitude.
Mhm.
When you wake up in the morning, if you put your hand on your heart and come up with 10 reasons that you're here, that you're okay with life, like 10 things that are happening pretty good to you, you can do this whether or not you're living in a tent, by the way. Of course, you can
Mhm.
do this. You can come up with 10. And if you can't come up with 10, then lower the bar a little bit and then come up with 10.
Hmm.
Because the
Mhm.
sun and the moon and the food you're about to eat and this weather and the air and I'm not saying you have to be entirely happy to be alive. I'm not saying that. I'm definitely not saying that. There's times in life where we are not happy to be alive, and that's actually okay too. It's
Mhm.
really okay to walk through these things. We pretend that those people who are unhappy about being alive have something wrong with them. That's like pretending that that doesn't happen to us.
Mhm.
Yes, it does. I don't
Yeah.
need to know both of you to know that there's been times in your life where you weren't that happy about being alive for a moment or two. Like
Mhm.
that really happened. It's a
Yeah.
natural state, but we say no, 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 because we don't want to be diagnosed. We
Yeah.
want to say, no, 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 that isn't me. That's them. I'm actually happy 100% of the time. No, you're
Mm.
not,
Mm.
Yeah,
because
but we
unhappiness is
but we
part
could
of
still be
life.
grateful. I agree with that. I always try to do that.
There's at
It's
least
very
10 things you can
important.
come up with.
And
Yeah, the
where
first
if
thing I do in
somebody
the mo
wants and if somebody wants to find these 20 things, which of your books or your website where are they looking to find those things to
so the
see if
Moss method is on my website. It's there at
okay.
welcometohumanity.net. And the Moss method has the list of 20 things. I think it's at Moss. I don't know which hashtag or which page it is, which tab it is, but the Moss method is sitting there for sure as one of the pages inside of the welcometohumanity.net. It's a cool little landing page. It's
We will
all about
all check that out. And what would
We
you
yeah.
like our
will.
audience to have as a takeaway today?
There might be nothing wrong with you.
Oh,
That's
perfect.
great. I love it. Thank you, Dr. Fred.
Yeah.
Our guest today on Late Boomers has been Dr. Fred Moss, psychiatrist, mental health coach, speaker, author, podcast host, and founder of Welcome to Humanity, which helps individuals find and express their true selves and find balance and peace, as you said, Dr. Fred, amidst life's chaos.
It
You
is
can
chaotic.
reach Dr. Fred through his link, drfred360.com, and his website, welcometohumanity.net. Thank you.
And
Thank
we
you.
want to thank our listeners for subscribing to our podcast and checking us out on YouTube and recommending us to your friends. We appreciate you. We'd love to have you give us a 5-star review, and we want to hear about your experiences with late boomers and what gets you inspired. We are on Instagram at I am Cathy Worthington and at I am Merry Elkins and at Late Boomers. Thank you for listening, and thanks again so much, Dr. Fred.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.